Hey guys, Chili B here with an update on the Revdis model. In the governance channel, SeaGolem dropped a chart of the latest model for revenue distribution. It's still a work in progress and there's parts of it that aren't clear yet and none of it's set in stone yet. So there'll definitely be updates and changes probably in the short to medium term, and it's probably going to have to go through some LIPs as well. So you'll want to keep a pretty close eye on what's happening with Revdis because for most of us, what we're here to see is some sort of gains, and this directly impacts our gains. On that topic, this is never financial advice. I'm just going through the news that's been dropped in Discord. So here's the diagram that SeaGolem dropped in the governance channel in Discord, and I'll link to it in the notes below so you can have a look at the original. But to orient ourselves, we'll start with looking at the grey area. So in the grey area, there's the vault, which is worth noting is different from the treasury. The treasury is a sub-component of the vault, which holds the money for operations and for investments. So sometimes in documents and stuff, they'll say vault and they'll say treasury, and it seems like they use it pretty consistently to mean two different things. So the vault seems to be the treasury plus the investment tokens plus the distribution pools. And then the treasury is just the money specifically for operations and investment reserves. And then just below that, you've got the staking contract. So these things in yellow are, from my understanding, the things that the team has direct control over. I don't mean that in a governance sense, but more as in they have the keys to the wallets. And between these two objects or entities or whatever you want to call them, they hold all the assets that the DAO has. So the vault holds all the stuff that we own and intend to hold, and the staking contract controls the flow of the distribution pools. I'm sure Kmao and James would have a more nuanced description of what's going on, but I think from a pretty high level that's right. Then on top of the staking contract and the vault, in green, we've got the DAO subgroups. So that's the council, the team, and lizard holders. Putting all those things together, the stuff inside the grey shaded area is basically what we'd call the DAO. Looking outside of the grey area, we've got all of our monetary inputs and outputs. So the things that we spend money on and the things that we make money from. Looking at that specifically, we make money in three different categories. From the bottom, we make money from investments. So that's our investments into GameFi seed rounds. We also make money from royalties, so secondary sales on OpenSea or whatever other platform. And then we make money from other, which is basically any side projects we have. So like maybe merchandise, maybe partnerships, maybe sponsorships, tournaments, whatever else we can think of. That all falls into the other category. Matching with those three categories of income are three pools of distribution. Looking at the royalties distribution, you can see in the diagram that 85% of royalties goes straight back into the treasury, and then the other 15% of royalties goes to the team. So none of the royalties from secondary sales touches Ethlizard holders. Looking at the other Revdis pool, you can see that the treasury gets a portion and the other Revdis pool gets a portion, which is then further split into lizard holders and team members. But those portions aren't decided on yet. So we won't talk about that in any detail. That is one of the things that I'm sure will change. The investment Revdis pool is a bit more complicated, so we'll dive into that now. The first step is we take some of our investments reserve to buy into a GameFi seed round or pre-seed round. In return, we get tokens, and that's locked into our investment tokens area within the vault, and they vest over a period of time. Once they're vested, they're split between the treasury and the investment Revdis pool. So the treasury gets the original cost of capital plus 40% of the profits, and then the Revdis pool gets the other 60%. And that 60% is further split. 5% goes to the council, 15% to the team, and then 40% to the staking contract, which goes to the Liz holders. So you might have heard lizard holders were entitled to different percentages, But because there's so many layers to the splitting, a lot of those percentages were probably right depending on what perspective you looked at it from. So you can see down here, lizard holders get 100% of Revdis if you're talking about the amount that comes out of the staking contract. Or you might say that lizard holders get 50% of the Revdis if you're talking about the profit split after the council and the team portion are taken out. Or you might say Ethlizards gets 40% if you're talking about the absolute amount from the profit. So what percentage you'd say the Ethlizard stakers get will vary depending on what part of this diagram you're talking about. So just be aware of that as you read different forum posts and newsletter stuff that comes out later. But if we're talking top line revenue, it's 40%. So that's how Revdis flows around in the Ethlizards model. Let's jump into how it affects the actual numbers. If you watched my Ethlizards thesis video, you would have seen this spreadsheet. And at the time, I guessed that we were getting 50% of the top amount of Revdis. But now with the model that SeaGolem's released, we can see that that number is actually 40%. So I'll fix that mistake in the spreadsheet and we'll see what numbers we get. It's obviously going to go down. So conservatively, at 40%, we're going to get 119 Revdis per Liz per year. A more realistic number might be 444. A more optimistic number would be 19,000. And a ridiculous number, which we would probably never see, would be 78,000. So all those numbers have dropped, obviously, but they're still pretty impressive based on current Liz prices. So if we hit the realistic target, that's something like a 30% yield on the current Ethliz price. If we hit the optimistic target, it's something like a 1000% yield on the current Ethliz price. So the numbers are still stacking up pretty well, even with that reduction in total Revdis percentage. This is, again, not financial advice. This is a really simple spreadsheet, and there's lots of moving parts, which this doesn't take into account. A second thing to think about from this Revdis model is how it aligns the incentives of different parties. So across the top here, I've got the 3 parties that are in the model, and down the side are the 3 sources of income. So the team gets revenue distribution from all 3 sources of income. Them getting Revdis from investment makes a lot of sense because we want them to be working hard at building connections with different game developers, and we want them building good deal flow mechanisms. So for them to get revenue distribution from the investments makes a lot of sense. It also makes sense for them to get revenue distribution from other sources, the catch-all category, so like merch and all that, because we want them to build out those types of partnerships as well, because that builds out the brand and the community and all that sort of stuff. Them getting revenue distribution from secondary sales, I had to think about this for a bit, because at first I didn't understand how the incentives lined up. But thinking about it a bit more, if they get revenue from secondary sales, from royalties, they're incentivized to generate as much transaction volume as they can for the Ethlizards NFT, which would mean more sales and probably a higher floor price as well. But why would we want that except to offload our NFTs? We would want it because more sales and a higher floor price probably means more interest in the project in general, which then probably means more interest specifically from game developers wanting us to invest in them. So they get incentives from the secondary sales, not directly because we want secondary sales to be higher, because we probably don't care too much about that, but because that means the community is more in demand in general, and that means the community is more in demand with game developers and their communities, so that we have more choices for seed round offers. The council only gets revenue distribution from the investments themselves, and that makes a lot of sense because the council just has one job, and that's to invest in successful GameFi seed rounds. So if that's how they get their gains, that's where all their focus is going. So the council one is simple and makes a lot of sense. Holders get revenue distribution from investments and from the other pool. And how does that align our incentives? So we'll obviously want to see investments succeed, but we can't contribute to it in the same way the team and the council can. The way that we can contribute, though, would be by building a community that's positive and supportive and brings a lot of value to the community of other games. So when a new game comes along and maybe we get a whitelist or we invest in it, we can help the investment by joining their community, chatting with their members, sharing our thoughts, basically being a community of people that other communities would want to have join. And what I mentioned was one way, but there's lots of other ways to do that as well. And by acting that way, hopefully other GameFi communities will want to include us as well. And then we get more chances to invest, more Revdis, and the cycle goes on. Then by default, our other ventures like merch and stuff will be successful as well. So our contribution as holders is mostly on the community side, as far as I can see. But there is a bit of a question about why holders don't get revenue distribution from secondary sales. Because if my reasoning for the team getting revenue from secondary sales makes sense, that same reasoning applies to holders. Because as we build the community, the NFTs become more in demand, there's more transaction volume, there's a high floor price, and that indicates a general desire to be part of the Ethlizards community. And we contribute to that by being a positive community. So why wouldn't we get Revdis from secondary sales? 2 thoughts on that. 1, in the end, I don't think we're going to care because our investment Revdis and our other Revdis is going to be pretty significant to the point where we're not sweating secondary sales too much. The other thing is that we can always also become flippers. And flippers basically are the beneficiaries of secondary sales. Because if the floor price pumps, if there's high liquidity on this project, flippers can flip to their heart's delight. So holders don't get royalties from secondary sales, but in the end I don't think it's going to matter too much because the other stuff will just outweigh it. And also, if we really want, we can flip our NFTs to get some benefit from secondary sales. It might mean you need more than one Ethliz. Not financial advice, of course. So that's the Revdis update from the model that SeaGolem dropped into the governance channel. Go over and check it out and let me know your thoughts on the model as it stands. Remember, it's still under construction. This isn't the final version. But let me know what you think in the comments. Leave some thoughts in Discord and give me a like and subscribe. I would really appreciate that, and I'll see you next time.